very good morning to you all. There we are. Right. Okay. So we have a little bit of a smaller group today, which is nice because you are the last free course. But it's good because then you have more room for questions whatsoever. If you have any questions already, feel free to ask me. And in the meantime, we'll just wait until it's 45 and then we get started. Open the chat. Can you all, by the way, hear and see me properly? If so, can you say yes in the chat? Okay, that's good. All right. Then we just give the last people a minute to get in. Where are you guys from, by the way? I'm always curious to see what nationality distribution is. So back when I did the bachelor, also did the English track, and there was only like, I think 3 or 4 Dutch people, and almost all the other people were German. And I see, and it's quite cool that it becomes more diverse every year. Nice. Turkey, France, Croatia, Lithuania. Also a lot of Bulgaria, you see a lot. Cool. Croatia is one of my favorite countries in Europe. I recently was there in one of these remote islands, Biševo, which was very cool. I truly enjoyed that a lot. All right. Okay, fellow Dutchie. Nice. Okay, cool. Good to know I'm not alone here. Welcome. Probably some more people will come in, but like I said, you're a little bit of a smaller group. So yesterday we had a very big group. And the good thing is, well, you're the last free group, so usually that's a bit of a smaller one. So feel free to ask any questions whatsoever. My name is Patrick, and what we'll be doing today is first I will talk a little bit about myself, not too much, because I think you can imagine that's not why you're here. But just common courtesy to introduce myself. I also did psychology, like I said, also at Tilburg University, also the international track. I started off with the Dutch track, but at some point I decided to switch. Mostly for the matter because I thought, out of all the people that follow the international track, they are mostly people that go out of their comfort zone, either because they're Dutch people that want to take an extra challenge, or they are international people actually moving abroad. And I thought it would be interesting to surround myself with people like that. And it truly was. So I made a lot of friends because of that, and I truly enjoyed that. Used to live in Africa for 2 years. Quite recently, actually, in Tanzania mostly. Also did a lot of voluntary work there. And I love that area. So also, I will put my phone number later on. I will send it to you. If you have any questions whatsoever about your study throughout the next 3 years, so also if it's about going on exchange, for example, doing extra programs whatsoever, just make sure to write down my number. You can ask me anything, because I know that sometimes it can be difficult to find the right information. So I'm here to help. In fact, I will actually already set my phone number now in the chat, but I will do it again in the break. But that way, you can always reach me. Okay, before we get started, what we are doing today is, well, this is an exam training, and the word already says it. What we do is we analyze all the exams, we take a look at all the exam questions, and then we build products around that. So be it a training, be it a summary, all works in the same way. And what we see is that about 75% of the exam questions that you will be examined, that will be in your exam, they tend to reoccur. So they tend to be recycled. Well, obviously they are not insane. They're not going to give you the exact same exam as last year, because they can imagine, you might know people in the second years, so don't do that. But what we, for example, see is that the exam of last year, 2023, looked a lot like the exam of 2015. And that way you kind of see that it rotates. Well, based on that, I analyzed all the exams, all the questions, and I made an analysis. So I looked, okay, what are the most important chapters, just statistically wise, Well, by the way, you will get these slides, so you're more than welcome to make pictures, but you can also just sit back and listen, because you will get the slides. What do we see here? Well, few things that stand out. These yeah, are not so important, kind of makes sense. Those are the introductory chapters. You see that quite often. Perception and sensation, so everything with the eye, the ganglion cells, that kind of stuff is very important. And the chapter of learning is relatively important. That's what we're going to be discussing today. Well, the reason that we're going to be discussing that today is because the questions about this specific part are quite detailed. So a lot of people think, oh, this is a relatively easy chapter, so they don't study it in depth. And then most people make a lot of mistakes on this chapter because, well, it goes a little bit deeper than you might expect. So the goal for today is that you won't make any mistakes on this part so that you have at least 14% of your exam already correct. The 10% variation, well, the word already says it, but sometimes I get the question. This is what we see that kind of varies. So 1 year he might add another question about perception and sensation. 1 year he might do it about language and thought. So this is something that's really difficult to pinpoint what is going to happen. About 25% of the questions are newly introduced, like I said. The reason they don't do 100% of the questions is because in order to establish that a question is good enough, so that it's not too difficult, not too easy, they need to do a lot of statistical analysis. So if they make a completely new exam and show it to you, then there is no way of them to compare it with other years and to see if it's an actual good question or not. That's the reason why they rotate. That's also the reason why they don't always particularly like what we are doing, because obviously, well, we use the exam questions and our goal is to make sure that students pass their exams. So that's basically sometimes a little debate that we have been engaging in. But yeah, the goal is to make sure that people pass the exam. So that's what we're here for. All right. Before we start, can you hear and see me properly? I already asked it before, but if so, can you say yes in the chat? Just to make sure that I'm not talking an hour and a half for nothing. I see yeses. Okay. So how we're going to do it today is if you have any questions whatsoever, you can use the chat. Sometimes I might ask yourself to unmute yourself if I point you out by name, because then it's easier, because then we are actually hear you talking instead of everyone waiting for the chat to blossom. And I do want to ask you, especially because we're with a small group today, can you put your cameras on? That will greatly help, because that way I can see if you guys understand it. We can go a little bit quicker with certain topics, and that way we might end like earlier, have a bit more time for practice questions. So if you can put your cameras on, that would be appreciated. I will give you a minute to do that. This we already discussed, by the way. Thank you so much. Appreciate that. Yeah, like I said, especially with a small group, sometimes that helps a lot for me. And that's also a way for me to establish if my jokes land, if you think I'm actually funny, or if I should just shut up and do my job. All right, before we get started with the content, this is an exam question as you can expect it. I don't expect you to immediately answer it, but I just want to give you 30 seconds to look at this and establish for yourself, would you be able to answer this already? All right. Okay, then we're going to continue. We're going to come back to this, but like I said, this is kind of the question that you can expect in the exam. Sometimes he asks it in a different order, but this is what you can expect. All right. We're going to start off with learning. Well, whenever I see a definition, my immediate question is, okay, to what extent do I have to know this? You do have to know this. Everything I'm going to be discussing today is important for the exam, otherwise I left it out. So learning is a relatively permanent change in behavior as a result of experience. Especially important here is the word relatively. So how could this be examined? Well, sometimes he says like learning, and then he gives a few definitions, and you have to establish what is a good definition. Why is relatively important? Well, quite often he puts in a definition without the word, which is a bit, but he does that. And then the answer is, well, no, learning is not a permanent change. Learning is a relatively permanent change. Because if I get bitten by a dog, and if that creates a phobia with me, well, I learned something. But let's say I get in a motor accident, my brain falls apart, then it could be that I kind of unlearn that. So it's relative. It's not like always it's not like a permanent change, it's a relatively permanent change. Okay. 3 types of learning: classical conditioning, operant conditioning, and observational learning. And then I want to ask you in the chat, if I say Pavlov, to which of these 3 is he connected? Do you remember? Can you throw it in the chat if you know the answer? So is that classical, operant, or observational? Our boy Pavlov. Yeah, classical. Right, most people are able to answer this. Well, unfortunately for you, that's not often what he asks. Sometimes he does, but most of the times it goes a little bit deeper than that. And you will get something like this. You will get a picture or you will get a description, and you have to be able to tell for each picture, are we talking about unconditioned stimulus, unconditioned response? Are we talking about a neutral stimulus, conditioned response? What are we talking about here? So this is Pavlov, great facial hair. And I'm 28 and I have to deal with this, so this is always very confronting for me to see. But basically what Pavlov did is the experiment with the dog and the bell. Probably, rings a bell, huh? No pun intended. But what happens here is that the dog gets presented food. At this point, the conditioning has just started. So it's not complete yet. So at this point, we talk about an unconditioned stimulus and an unconditioned response, as we see right here, right? Because, well, like I said, no conditioning yet. So unconditioned, unconditioned. Well, now we show the dog a bell. The dog doesn't really care about the bell, as you can see. It's very neutral. And that's also why we call it, the dog gives a neutral response to the bell, which is a neutral stimulus. So unconditioned, unconditioned, neutral, neutral. Okay. These 2 quite often go relatively easy for people. Most people make the mistakes on the 3rd picture. Because what do we have here? Well, you have to understand that now we are going to start conditioning. So at this point, the food is still unconditioned stimulus, and the dog still has an unconditioned response. We are just starting the process. We are not finished yet. That also means that the bell is still a neutral stimulus. Easy way to remember this is that the 3rd picture is just a combination of the 1st and the 2nd, right? It's both unconditioned and it's neutral. So that's a way to remember that. Well, what is the idea? If I present the bell and the food simultaneously, if I do that often enough, at some point I create an association, connection in the dog's mind. And the moment that he hears the bell, he thinks, oh, right, then food is also presented with that. And the dog already starts producing saliva, the conditioned response in this sense. So only at this point, the conditioning has been completed. So we talk about a conditioned stimulus and a conditioned response. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? You can also throw in like a moi. If you think it's kind of clear, then I will come back to it in the break. Okay, I see yeses. The reason I specifically use the word connection is because sometimes he presents you with a case and the question is this classical conditioning or operant conditioning? And they look alike. So sometimes it's difficult to establish like, okay, what is he talking about here? Then you have to see what is the emphasis on. Is the emphasis on a connection? So creating a new connection between, for example, the bell and the food, then it's classical conditioning. Connection, classical, CC. That's how you can remember that. If the focus is more on punishment and reward, that's operant conditioning. So you can present the exact same case, but the question is, what does he focus on? Creating a new connection, or is he talking more about punishment and reward? Connection, classical, conditioning, CC. Later on, we're also going to be practicing with this, but this is a way to remember that. Okay. Well, to get such an effect, to acquire such an effect that the dog starts producing saliva when he sees the bell, as we see here, we call this acquisition. And what do you have to know about acquisition? So how quick, how easy is it to get a certain effect? The boring answer is it really depends on the situation. So whenever he asks you, how long does acquisition take? Sometimes he does that. And he says, for example, 5 hours, 2 weeks, 3 months, depends on the situation. It's always depending on the situation. Because, for example, with a trauma, if a dog bites me, he only needs to bite me once, and then I can already be conditioned, right? He doesn't need to bite me 40 times in a row. That's ridiculous. But if I want to condition you that every time I do this, you make a somersault backwards, yeah, that's going to take a lot of time. So once again, with psychology, quite often, the nuanced answer is the best answer. That is acquisition, to acquire such an effect. Well, the effect can also disappear again, getting extinct. Yeah, this we call, makes sense, extinction. So if I show the dog the bell for a very long time without giving the food, at some point the dog is going to get bored again. It goes from this picture right here to this picture. It doesn't care anymore. It's like, yeah, I don't give a shit. I used to get food with that, but now I don't. So screw you. I'm going back to here. Well, what do we see, however? At first we thought, okay, so the dog has forgotten the effect. But what we see is that if we then only once present the bell together with the food again, so we once again show the connection, pow, he instantly remembers again, he's instantly conditioned again. And this we call spontaneous recovery. So the takeaway message is that even if an effect gets extinct, it doesn't mean it's completely gone and you have to start all over. Just by conditioning once again, once more, you already have the effect again. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat, please? So let's do it like this, also because we're a relatively small group. If you say no, I will explain it again. If you say like moi, then I won't stop because I know that some people find it difficult maybe to speak up in a group. And then we can, for example, I can help you after class or during the break. So just feel free to say that. And if I see enough mois, then I will explain it again. But then at least I will not point you out. Okay. Okay. Furthermore, important, stimulus generalization and discrimination. Let's go back to the example that a dog bites me. So golden retriever, yeah, this kind of dog. I think it's golden retriever at least. They bite me. What happens now? Well, I'm not just afraid of this specific golden retriever that bit me, right? I become afraid of all dogs. I get a phobia. I generalize my fear to all dogs in the population. That's a problem, right? If I would just be afraid of only this dog, not so much a problem, just avoid this dog. But the problem is I generalize. I find all dogs terrifying from now on. Let's say I'm in therapy, and at some point my psychologist says, okay, I want you to get rid of your phobia because, yeah, I don't feel like you having a phobia. Well, then what they're going to do is discrimination training. This is a very important term for your exam. General, throughout your whole bachelor, whenever they are talking about concrete treatments, they tend to be examined more often because the university wants to check if you actually know your shit if you become a psychologist. So whatever things you have to put in practice, they are likely to examine that more. Makes sense. I also think that's a very good thing that the university does that. So discrimination training is an important concept. How does this work? Well, like I said, I'm afraid of all dogs because a golden retriever bit me. They put me in a room and they throw in a very small dog. And at first I'm afraid, right? Because I'm afraid of all dogs. So I'm like, fuck, dog. But then, you know, the longer I spend with this dog, I feel like, oh, this dog isn't so bad. He's actually kind of cute. I think, okay, maybe I'm not afraid of all dogs. Maybe I'm just afraid of big dogs. And maybe I think small dogs are okay. I learned to discriminate, to differentiate within my phobia. Next step, well, now I'm afraid of all big dogs. He throws in a German Shepherd. Big dog, once again, I'm afraid. Fuck German Shepherd. But the longer I spend with this German Shepherd, I feel like, oh, this dog is also not that bad. Okay, maybe I'm not afraid of all big dogs. Maybe I'm just afraid of golden retrievers. And this is literally what discrimination training does. It looks a little bit like exposure therapy. What they do is they learn you firsthand to differentiate within your phobia, to go from all dogs are scary to maybe only this dog is scary. Once again, important takeaway message here. If they ask you how fast or how slow gets an effect acquired or extinct, the answer is depends on the situation. Never go for the concrete answer possibilities. Okay. This practice time. So for yourself now, for each of these pictures, fill in what we are dealing with here. So I'm going to put the answer possibilities in the chat. So we have condition stimulus, condition response, unconditioned. So here they are. 6 answer possibilities for each of the pictures. Fill in what you think is correct. And once you've done that, once you're done, just say yes in the chat. And if I see enough yeses, then we're going to be discussing the answers. So take your time. Okay, we'll wait for 1 or 2 more yeses. I see you very excited, yes. Love it. All right. Ines, could you unmute yourself and walk us through your answer, if I pronounce it correctly? Yes. I don't hear you yet.
For
Maybe that's
the
my
first
fault.
image,
I do.
put for the first image, I put unconditioned stimulus and unconditioned response because it's the start. So, and for the second one, so a neutral stimulus because the conditioning hasn't started yet, and still a neutral response.
Correct.
For the third image, I put neutral stimulus still and unconditioned stimulus and unconditional response because it has started, but it doesn't happen just with the bell. There's still food. And for the last one, conditioned response and conditioned stimulus, because this time it's without the food, just by seeing the bell, the dog has a response.
Perfect. Thank you so much. That's perfectly correct. So indeed, if you find this conceptually difficult, just take a look and see it goes from unconditioned to all neutral to all conditioned. That is pretty straightforward, right? We haven't done any conditioning, then it's neutral, then it's conditioned. Then the third image, if you find that challenging, just remember what I said. It's a combination of the first and the second image. But like Ina said, conceptually, that's exactly how it works. So also if you're able to remember that way, totally fine. Okay. Any questions about, or let's say, is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes in the chat or no? Okay. Sometimes you get the question like, okay, but how do you know this is the first time and not like the 40th time or something like that? You can't really know, but you just have to know that this kind of scheme, this kind of structure, that implies that it's the first time. So this is one of the things you kind of have to know and have to see once. That's why we are discussing it today. Okay, that was classical conditioning. Now we're going to continue to operant conditioning. Operant conditioning, change due to punishment and reward. Like I said, that's the big difference between classical and operant. The focus here is on punishment and reward in comparison to creating an association, creating a connection, the CC. The law of effects, you have to know. You have to know what it entails and you have to know it's from Thorndike. What does it say? Well, the law in itself is not that revolutionary, I would say. It says behavior with positive consequences is repeated more quickly and efficiently. So when I was not able to tie my own shoelaces until like embarrassingly late in my life. The reason for that was well, I was, I think, like 10 or something like that, or 12, maybe even. And there were always girls in my class that used to tie my shoelaces for me. And as an 11-year-old boy, that was the only female attention I would get. So I never really had the personal incentive to start learning it. And at some point, my parents were like, okay, well, this kid is obviously going to get bullied in high school if he continues like this. So let's make sure he can actually tie his own shoelaces before going to high school. So they told me, you know, every single time you do that, you will get €1. So I taught myself in my room to do it very fast, tie my shoelaces, and then I ran down, did it like 7, 8 times in a row, very quick. So I got $8. And then my parents said, okay, well, the deal is gone now, off the table. But that is basically what the law of effect implies, right? So because the behavior, tying my shoelaces, had positive consequences, I was doing it more quickly and more efficiently. Makes sense. But it is an important one. It's an obvious one, but that's also why some people tend to forget it, because they think, oh yeah, I get this, and then I forget it. And, you know, this does come back in your exam quite often. Operant response. Well, your response because something's happening in your environment. This man, you have to know, this is Mr. Skinner. Put his name in chat. Mr. Skinner is the man that is famous for developing operant conditioning. So sometimes he asks you, like, okay, who is famous for operant conditioning? And then he puts in both Thorndike as well as Skinner. And then you have to know Thorndike created the foundational law, the law of effect, but it's Skinner that really became famous with it. So he's the big man. Well, Skinner lived in Nevada, close to Las Vegas, and he was a bit of a socialist, so he became very depressed to see his theory being used by casinos. So he died very depressed. Same for Freud, by the way. He saw his theory being used by the Nazis while he was a Jew himself. So generally the takeaway message, if you find in psychology something that works, be a bit careful with it, I guess. Basically, what you have to know about this is, well, we're talking about reinforcement, just a different word for reward, and punishment, right? That's what operant conditioning is about. Let's start with rewards. What do we have to know about rewards? First of all, you have to know the difference between a positive and a negative reward. Positive means applying something in this context. A negative means taking something away. This is very important because we will see the same distinction within punishment. So what does this look like? Well, a positive reward, so it is something chill, and positive, it applies something. So for example, I give you money if you tie your shoelaces. Right? Chill, and I apply. An example of a negative reward, don't get it wrong, it's still a reward. It's still something chill. Don't get confused by the word negative. It means taking something away. So what is an example? Well, let's say my mom took a different approach when I was a kid, and she would constantly scream in my ears until I would tie my own shoelaces, and then she would stop. Stopping the screaming is a reward. I like that, but it's taking something away. It's taking something unpleasant away. Okay? That's the difference. Is this difference clear for everybody? Because the positive and negative you're going to see once again with punishment. So it's important to get that clear. Can I see yes or no in the chat? Applying and taking something away. This is also something that we will be practicing later on. Okay. Second one, primary versus secondary reinforcement. This one is very easy to remember. In the exam, he gives you an example and he asks you, is this a primary or a secondary reinforcement? What is the difference? Just ask yourself one question. Can I condition a dog with this? If so, then it's primary. Food, attention, water, living space. If you can't, then it's secondary. Money, right? You can condition humans with money because we have learned that it has value. But a primary reward is something that in our primal instincts we want. So whatever example he gives you, just ask yourself, will a dog Give me a paw for this. Will he do a little trick if I give him this? Well, with money, he wouldn't. With food, he would. Then, continuous versus partial intermittent reinforcement. Very important one. What is a continuous reinforcement? A continuous reinforcement means that every single time I do something, I get the same reward. So if I throw €1 in a vending machine for a can of Coke, I get 1 can of Coke back. Not sometimes none, not sometimes 42, always the same result. Well, then you already see that the partial/intermittent reinforcement, same thing. What that means, well, other way around, eh? So with a jackpot, for example, with a slot machine. So sometimes I get €1 back, sometimes I get €20 back, sometimes I get nothing at all back. That's the difference conceptually. We will go a little bit deeper into this and in what is the most effective. So before we do that, is this clear for everybody? The difference between continuous and partial reinforcement. Can I see yes or no in the chat? Sometimes he just asks you this, gives you an example, you have to tell which one of the two it is. But more often, he asks you, okay, what is now the most effective? What do you have to remember about this? Well, let's take an example. I was in Vegas last March. Terrible place. Fun place, but terrible place, terrible people. But generally, I got to talk with someone that I befriended someone that worked there. And what they said, what they do in Vegas, and this kind of gives an answer to the question, what works better? Let's say you go to a slot machine. This is a true story. So let's say you go to a slot machine in Vegas, not as well regulated as in Europe, so they're allowed to do a bit more things. And you go sit there, and what does this slot machine do? Well, based on a lot of different things, they kind of establish if this is the first time that you are with the slot machine. So they weigh you, they take a look at how long it takes for you to put a dollar bill in. They take a lot of factors and they actually want to see, okay, let's say I go sit there, they want to see this Patrick dude, is this the first time that he's with the slot machine? If so, well, then the fun begins because now they want to make sure you stay with the slot machine. How do they do this? They start off with continuous rewards. So the first time you throw a dollar in, you have quite a big chance of winning something. And obviously not winning a lot, but they do a lot of beeps and bloops and lights and blah, blah, blah. And you have the feeling you're winning a lot. And the first few times, they will give you some feedback like, hey, this is a good slot machine. You're winning something, you're winning something, you're winning something. Continuous reward. Because they want to make sure that you feel this is a good slot machine. Afterwards, they will go over and they will develop it in partial reinforcement. So then suddenly you win nothing. And then you win the jackpot. And then you win nothing again. Why do they do this? Well, essentially because that keeps it interesting and because it resists extinction. Like we said, extinction is that the effect gets extinct. Well, this way, I'm still thinking, is it coming? Like if I don't win something 3 times in a row at the slot machine, I still think, okay, but I want to have that feeling of the jackpot again. Is that effect still coming? It keeps it interesting. So takeaway message here, what is most effective? You start off with continuous and then you go over to partial. Okay? Right. Okay, well, let's talk about child abuse. Great party starter, always. Bit of cynical examples in this slide. I made it, I don't sleep a lot, so I made it during the evening, but I kept it in because I think that way it will stick with you. Punishment. Same thing with reward. We have positive and negative. Exactly the same meaning, I already told you. Positive is applying something, negative is taking something away. Example of positive punishment. Well, let's say I'm a terrible parent and I have a kid that doesn't listen. Positive, applying, and punishment. Well, let's say I give the kid a headbutt because I don't like my kid. That's quite literally applying something, huh? And it's a punishment, assuming that the kid does not like that. More ethical example, negative punishment. Negative, taking something away. Punishment, the kid doesn't like it. I take away the phone of the kid, right? That's what most parents do. Or I take away its freedom to play outside. I ground my kid. Okay. You have to understand that punishment is not very effective. So on the exam, it could be that he asks you, okay, what is one reason why punishment is not effective? Or he asks you, pick out the wrong reason why punishment is ineffective. So you have to be able to recognize these. I will walk you through it. First reason, well, before we start, the overlapping reason is to make punishment effective, you need a lot of criteria to be met. And that is very difficult. So generally, we consider it to be ineffective. That's important to remember. Why? First of all, the intensity of punishment has to increase. So, how terrible that might sound, if I headbutt my kid doesn't listen to me because of the pain he gets inflicted. He listens to me because of the fear of what's going to happen. And if I apply the same strength over and over again, the kid will get used to it. I always have to think that, my back door is open. So my neighbors probably think I'm giving a lecture on child abuse. So that's something I'm going to have to deal with later, I guess. But the reason I think this is a good example, because it really shows the problem, right? And also while abuse quite often escalates, because, well, you have to do it harder and harder. Second one, time interval. So some people believe that if you have a dog and if the dog pees in the house, that you have to rub the dog's nose in its own pee to establish an effect. It's quite often that I see here more empathy for this example than for the example with the kid, which is always interesting to see. That's more on you guys, I guess. But the reason is why this doesn't work. It's the time interval has to be very quick. So with a dog, but also with humans, you only have a few seconds to establish the punishment to make sure that a connection is created in the brain. So even like when I was a kid, I was a terrible kid. So I would throw with doors, I would yell, and I would then run upstairs to the attic where I slept. And my dad had to come up 2 stairs to make sure he was able to provide me with punishment. And the thing is, I'm not an idiot. I know that I was being punished because I was a little dick. But like I said, punishment is not rational, punishment is emotional. So in order to create an effect, you have to be very quick in applying the punishment, which is kind of difficult sometimes. Consistency of punishment. Not to be confused. The intensity has to increase, but the kind of punishment has to stay the same. So you can't sometimes headbutt your kid and sometimes take its phone away. In order to create a connection, you have to do the same thing over and over again. Why is this a problem? Well, some punishments can't be applied more than once, like taking away the phone of your kid, right? I mean, at some point, your kid is going to run out of phones, and then you don't have punishment anymore. The fourth one, a little bit of a sad one, association with reward. So a friend of mine, she works for the Kindertelefoon, which is like a Dutch association that helps kids that are in need, and kids can call them anonymously. And then what they have to do at the Kindertelefoon is at some point they have to ask the kid, have you thought about getting external help? And then 9 out of 10 times, that's the moment that the kid hangs up the phone. Why? Well, because kids that are being abused are also kids that are being neglected quite often. So the moment they feel, okay, my parents will be taking away, what they kind of are thinking is like, okay, it's terrible that they hit me, but it's also the only moment I get with them. It's kind of sad. Hence the sad emoji in order to express my feelings about this. Okay, fifth one, a little bit more on a lighter note. Can I see in the chat how many brothers/sisters you guys have? I just want to see who of you have experienced the same kind of trauma as I did. How many brothers, sisters? Throw it in the chat. 2 older brothers. I can imagine that's harsh. Okay, all right. Yeah, the reason I asked that is indeed because I wanted to see who shared the same trauma as I did. I have an older brother. We used to fight a lot. And at some point, my parents were like, okay, we don't care who started it, we are going to end it. Like one of these one liners that all parents seem to have in their repertoire. I'm not sure where they get it, but they told us that. And then we were like, okay, well, that's shitty, because as brothers, our responsibility is to make each other's life miserable. That's what you need to do always. So what we did instead is we created like a new language. So before we would go for dinner, my brother would look to me and he would say, "Hey Patrick, I have made a new word, and it's called a frunky. We still use it until now." And he said, "A frunky is a loser because your friends are also losers." And I was like, "Okay, cool, new word. Okay, all right, got it." And then we would be having dinner with my parents, and my brother would be looking at me with a big smile, and he would be like, "You're a frunky." And then at that point, my parents were like, "Oh, that's so cute. They're finally becoming friends. They have their own secret language that we can know about." But basically, what was happening here is the fifth one. We were not changing our behavior. We were instead avoiding the punishment and being sneaky about it. And this is what kids often do. They don't understand why they're being punished, so they just learn how to play around the rules. Well, we are best friends now, so that kind of solved itself, but that shows that kids can be innovative in avoiding that kind of punishment. Are these reasons clear for everybody? Can you see a yes or no in the chat? Okay. Right. Then let's take a small break because we're almost 45 minutes on its way. So let's say we do it until 11:30. So 6 minutes if you want to get some coffee. If you have some questions, throw them in the chat. I will also get a drink, but then I will see the questions when I get back. In the meantime, let's actually open a slide that is useful for you instead of the slide break. So let's do the exam analysis. I think that's fine, right? Okay. So 11:30, we'll be back. Okay. Like I said, any questions, just throw it in the chat. I will be answering it once I'm back. All right. Okay, I see some questions in the chat. Let me take a look. How detailed do we need to, wait, I have to, how detailed do we have to know the names of who conducted what study, who found a term? Not the big names like Skinner, of course. Um, yeah, the boring answer, once again, is it really depends. So the big names you do have to know. So all names I'm mentioning today, you do have to know. The experiments, not so much. So if it's just like he throws in an experiment and then between brackets you have the name and the year, right? That's most often not important. So the big names, Skinner, Wundt, those people are important. The Gestalt psychologists are important, but I think they're relatively easy to remember because they just all have German names. So they're easy to distinguish in an A, B, C, D. For intro to psychology, the names are way more important than for experimental psychology. Here it's mostly these two chapters where it is important. Okay. How important are the specific brain areas? They are important. Yeah. So the fusiform face area, for example, is very important. The area of Wernicke or Broca, very important. The ventral and dorsal pathway, all the things considering neuro that will be discussed in experimental psychology, all important for the exam to really know how a certain area is called and what it does. Okay. They can actually go quite detailed. I will show later on show also a neuro question that is connected with this chapter, and you will see that it goes quite deep sometimes. In the sense that not as deep, but that they really want to see, like, okay, do you actually know your shit? Or did you just kind of sit in the lectures and kind of know your shit? Because psychology, a lot of people, when they first study it, they feel like, oh, this is kind of obvious. I can just remember this by heart. And obviously, what the university wants to do is they want to differentiate between the people that really studied and deserve a 9 or a 10 for that reason, and people that just were in the lectures, heard like hippocampus one time, and then they get a question about hypothalamus, and then they completely have it wrong because they remember the term a little bit, but not really, right? So that is quite important. But I'll also show you an example later on and how they differentiate between those people. Okay, let me open up my drink. Escape conditioning. This is a very important phenomenon. So, well, we talked about child abuse. So let's keep the positive vibe going and continue to animal abuse. So, what did they do? They threw a dog in a box. Classic. And what they did is they gave him a shock. And then the dog, well, he escaped, right? So we conditioned him that escape was a good thing because when he got here, he didn't get a shock anymore. And what did we see? The dog still is kind of trying to run. So he still wants, this is like a treadmill. So he still tries to run, he still tries to get away. This we call the escape conditioning. We conditioned the dog that escaping is a good thing. And even when he's then in a safe space, he still wants to escape. Okay. Well, all the scientists, they were thinking like, this is kind of cruel for the dog. We are very smart scientists. Surely there must be a way that we can even make this worse for the dog. And that's what they did. So they threw the dog back in the box and they gave him a shock again. So the dog went over, wanted to walk here again. And now they also gave him a shock here. They wanted to see what will the dog do. Will he try to get back again? Will he try to bark? What is he going to do? None of the above. What the dog did instead is it laid down and just accepted the shocks for what it was. It just started whimpering and was like, this is my fate now. We call this learned helplessness. This is a very important term because this is also something that you see in people with depression. So once again, things that are practically applicable, right? They are important for the exam. So basically what happened here is that the dog was like, yeah, this used to be safe. This was the only safe space that I got. And you took that away from me. So this is my life now. I'm not going to try to get out. This is it. This is also what you, for example, saw with people during COVID. that people that were already like a bit on the edge of depression, but maybe had that one good friend that he could always rely on. Well, their safe space. COVID took that away. And then people that are already on the edge of depression, they're not gonna start exercising, doing new things. They're gonna be like, well, that was the only thing I got. That's gone now. Fuck it. This is my life. Learned helplessness. Very important term. Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? Okay. Okay. All right. A lot of people find this difficult. So pay attention with this slide. This is the little bit of neuro that you will get for this chapter. What do you have to know? First takeaway message. Learning has a lot to do with feeling rewarded, right? As we already saw, operant conditioning. The brain regions that are connected with feeling rewarded are the following. The nucleus accumbens, the medial forebrain bundle, and the hypothalamus. For this chapter, you don't need to know in detail what all of these three do. You just have to know that they are connected to reward. So how this will be examined is that he asks you, okay, what is a brain region that has least to do with reward? And then he throws in a fourth answer possibility because it's multiple choice, A, B, C, D, right? And that's 9 out of 10 times he throws in the hippocampus as well. So this is one of these questions where I said, he really wants to see, if you hear this once, you can probably remember a few of them. But if you hear this once and you don't know, then it can be very difficult once on the exam to think, fuck, was it now the hypothalamus or was it the hippocampus? Remember, it's the hypothalamus. Hippocampus is more connected with memory. Okay? How I remember it, but it's a bit of a Dutch memory shortcut, but it can still help you out, is that the hypothalamus has more like a ja sound, like a yes sound. So yes, that one is important. The hippocampus is not. Hypothalamus, yamus. That kind of sound, if you remember it like that way, then you can be able to differentiate. These three you have to recognize. Other important things is that the neurotransmitter connected with rewards is dopamine. So he can throw in dopamine, cortisol, serotonin, oxytocin. He throws all in, and then you have to be able to tell it's dopamine, feeling dope, right? It's the feeling you get when you are bungee jumping. Where serotonin has more to do with feeling happy and feeling cozy. You know, if you've ever seen people doing MDMA or something like that, that's mostly serotonin. So people just want to be under a blanket and talk to their friends. Dopamine is more like hard. Cocaine and heroin are two drugs that really play on dopamine. So that's also the reason why they're very addictive. So you have to be able to know that they play on dopamine. And now we're going to discuss one of the more considered difficult topics about this specific chapter. And that is the exam question that I showed you all the way in the beginning. So I'm going to walk you through it. Let me take a sip. All right. So what did they do? They made an experiment. And they basically wanted to see what condition makes people most motivated to push on a certain button. So they all had a red button in front, all in different condition, 4 different conditions. They wanted to see what makes people press the most. What kind of reward scheme do I have to create here? We're going to talk about them from worst to best. And the way to remember this, I made a little ChatGPT mental shortcut with a little image. Fisherman visits friendly vroom. Vroom being this car. Thought it was a good name for a car. So FIVIFRVR. That's the order. So there's also just a way of remembering it. Eh? Even if you don't understand it conceptually, remember this. This goes from bad to best. Conceptually then, what are we talking about here? We're going to start off with the very worst one, the FI, the fixed interval. What does this mean? Fixed means fixed, on one fixed moment. Interval means time. So what is the idea here? I stand there with my lab coat and I tell, for example, Rose, I say, Rose, you have to press this button and every minute you will get a reward. Incredibly boring because, well, it doesn't matter how often you press the button. The only reason you do it is because I tell you to do it. And it's very boring because you know it's going to be every single minute, right? Sucks. So this is the worst kind of way of making sure that people press the button as much. Fixed interval. Then variable interval. Still time, because we're talking about interval, but now it varies when I get a reward. So sometimes I get it after 1 minute, sometimes after 1 minute, 10 seconds, then 12 seconds again. Well, what do we see here? Still, people don't like it as much because you don't have control over it, right? You don't really have, yeah. I mean, it doesn't matter how often you press the button, you will just get a reward at a random moment of time. But it's a little bit more interesting for people because it's still exciting because you don't know when a reward is going to be. So FI, VI. Then FR, fixed, one fixed moment. Ratio is about how often you press the button. So it's not about time anymore. So after every 100th time that I press the button, I get a reward. People go crazy for this, as you can see. It's way steeper. Because now, the faster I press the button, the more reward I will get. Great stuff. People love it. Well, then the very best, makes sense maybe, is the variable ratio. So once again, it's about how often you press the button, but now you don't know when it's going to be. So sometimes it's already after 3 times, and after 100 times, and 102 times. So it keeps interesting, and you have control. So that's from worst to best. Fisherman visits friendly vroom. Okay, try to remember this picture. That's why I made a picture with it. Clearly that the car is in his home, right? Typical home for a car. Okay, all right. Practice time. You can throw yes in the chat if you want to see it discussed. So don't say the answer possibility just yet. Some people might take a little bit longer. Okay, we'll give you a few more minutes. So either think about it conceptually, like when I just walked through it, or think about the mental shortcut that I gave you. All right, I see some good answers in my chat. Okay, I will be discussing it. I see a question. How is the near depression state called? Learned helplessness. Yeah, learned helplessness. Okay, no real reason to let anyone speak up because this is just like, have you remembered it from previous slide? Well, the good answer. Let's take a look at the fisherman visits friendly room. Okay, so we're searching for FI, This is from least effective to most effective. So this is the same order that we just discussed, luckily. Otherwise, always obviously remember, like really read the question. Could be that he reverses it. Well, okay. So we are talking about fisherman visits friendly room. FI visits friendly room. So the good answer is answer B. Okay? Is this clear for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? The only kind of different way that he sometimes examines this is that he shows you the graph and that you have to say, okay, this one, what is this? Is this variable ratio, fixed ratio, variable interval, fixed interval? Then also just remember the order, right? Then you just know that the best one must be the VR. So it's a variable ratio. Okay? Quite often he just asks you about the order. He generally doesn't throw in a lot of pictures. Sometimes like 1 or 2 questions, but Tilburg University kind of like stopped that because of, saving paper. So that's a good thing, I guess. So it's more about remembering an order. Also with, for example, the chapter of the sensation, you have to know the order in which light travels through your eye and say the exact right order. It almost never happens that he shows you a picture of the eye and you have to say, this is this, this is this, this is this. You have to know it like verbally, basically be able to retrieve it from your mind. Observational learning, the third one. Classical conditioning solved, operational conditioning, then observational learning is the third way of learning. Albert Bandura, that's the name you have to remember for this. He said, okay, we also learn by looking at others. So let's say that my dad is, for example, shaving. If I'm also going to shave, yes or no, depends on 2 things. One, the consequence of the model. So the consequence for my dad. If he shaves and cuts open his entire face, I'm not eager to repeat it. And the status of the model. If I look up to my dad, more eager to repeat it. Okay. This is also the reason why for football commercials, for example, you always see like a football player, high status, shaving himself and then giving a smooth smile in the mirror. Consequence for the model, well, that makes young guys want to repeat that. We are so easily to manipulate. Guys, that is. Aggression and fear. These 2 you have to remember very well. These are the emotional states which we are most likely to copy from others. Why? Well, if you all smile, of course, that also makes me happy. And if you all cry, well, that might also make me sad. But if you all look like aggressive, if you look angry at me, then that could be that you're all going to attack me. So I also have to become aggressive because I have to ready my body to fight you guys. So that's the reason, because it directly plays a role in my survival. So I'm very easy to copy this. And fear. For the same reasoning. If you all look afraid right now, well, then it could be that something terrifying is happening behind me. So I also become afraid. That could be a threat. These 2 emotions you have to be able to recognize. That he asks you, what are you most likely to copy? Then he gives like a combination of 2 emotions, and then you have to be able to say it's aggression and fear, and not fear and happiness, or aggression and sadness. Aggression and fear. Lastly, culture. Culture is a very good example of how we learn by observing others. Takeaway message here is that animals can also have culture. And culture is defined as just a set of IDs. You don't really have to know the definition that well, but just for your own ID, as a set of IDs that is being transported within a society. So they found out with chimps, for example, in the Congo River, there were one group of biologists and they saw a group of chimps, and they were all walking in the river like this, with their hands like above the water. So they were biologists, not psychologists. So what were they going to do? They wanted to investigate the water. They thought maybe that's parasites, something like that. But while they were doing that, they saw that on the other side of the river, there was another group of chimps that just walked with their hands in the water. So it has nothing to do with the water. In fact, it was just like one group of chimps where an alpha male at some point was like, ah, fuck it, I'm not going to get my hands wet. And he would just be walking like this, and then all the other chimps would kind of follow him. And even maybe generations after he died, that was still a culture that was being brought in that specific group of chimps. Okay. Question, no, let's say, is this clear about for everybody? Can I see yes or no in the chat? All right. All right, all right, all right. Question time. If you think you're able to answer this question, you can say yes in the chat. If not, you can say no in the chat. If I received enough answers, then I know that I will continue. Okay. All right. What does the law of effect imply? This is one of these questions, like obviously during the exam, you get multiple choice, right? But the best way to learn is to retrieve information from your mind. So that is the reason I sometimes ask it open like this. So you really have to think. That's better than just repeating content. You have to retrieve it. What does the law of effect imply? There was the example with tying my shoelaces. Behavior with positive consequences is repeated more quickly and efficiently. Right? If I get a reward for something, I start doing it more often and more efficiently. Who has become known for further developing the theory of operant conditioning? You can throw the answer in the chat if you know the answer. All right. Okay. So most people, they don't go for A. Pavlov is classical conditioning, right? Was the guy with the great mustache. Bandura is observational learning. And then some people, I saw some people also send me private texts. I see most people going for D, Skinner. Some people going for C, Thorndike. The good answer is answer D, Skinner. So Thorndike indeed created the law of effect, and that was very important for operant conditioning. So he created the foundation of it, but Skinner is really the famous man for further developing the theory. So really make sure you know that difference. Okay? So the good answer is answer D, Skinner. Okay, one more. For each of the following samples, choose whether it's positive or negative and a reinforcement or punishment. So do this for yourself. Take a look. Are we talking about positive, negative? Is the reinforcement or a punishment? If you're done with this, or if you just would like to see it discussed, say yes in the chat. If I see enough yeses, we're going to discuss this. Okay, I see the first yes. We'll give you a little bit more time. Second yes. So if you find this difficult, just remember, positive is applying, negative is taking away. Reinforcement is always chill, and the punishment is always not chill. Okay, received enough yeses. Rose, could you unmute yourself and walk us through your answer?
I have for the first one positive punishment, the second one negative punishment, third one negative reward, and the last one positive reward.
Perfect. Well done. Indeed. So positive punishment, right? I apply something and the kid doesn't like it. With these questions, with these examples, just first look, is it applying or taking something away, positive or negative, and then take a look, is this chill for the person receiving it or not? Well, I had that my toddler is a positive punishment. I take away my toddler's phone is a negative punishment, right? It's negative because I'm taking something away. It's still a punishment because my kid wants to keep his phone. The third one people find sometimes difficult, and I don't mean just ethically. I mean, they find it difficult, and sometimes he puts in an example like this in the exam, because if you read this quickly, it sounds like a punishment. Well, it's definitely negative because it takes something away, but it's a reward. Taking away the pain is a reward. So it's about consequence. And I give my toddler chocolate, positive reinforcement. Okay. Last question. Just give, no, wait, let's actually do this. We will do this afterwards. I think that makes more sense. Because before we go back to this, and I will also give you some advice on how to study generally, I want to ask you the following. In your mail, or you can scan a QR code, you have an evaluation form in which you can evaluate me as a human being. Well, mostly as a teacher, but also as a human being, I guess. And I want to ask you guys to do that, because if I have enough answers, then I may continue. This way, my manager knows if I did well, if I really suck. And I always want to ask you, because like sometimes people are very positive, and I really appreciate that, because then I get a raise, and people, I get appreciated by my manager. But you also have a chance to put in some words. So if you still feel like, okay, I think you can improve this, do please provide, because that way I can still improve, So you can do a numbers thing and you can do a text thing. So if I have enough answers, then I will continue. So I will give you a second to do that. It's either in your mail or you can scan it. Okay. Waiting for 4 more. You guys are quick. Appreciate that. So the awkward thing is that I can see obviously it's anonymous, but I can see the average. So if you really hate me, it's going to be very embarrassing 10 minutes, in which I'll be mostly crying. And I'm an ugly crier, You know how some people are pretty criers? I'm the opposite. For me, it looks like I'm screaming. Okay, appreciate it. That's sufficient. Yeah, you're still allowed, obviously, to fill it in afterwards, but that's enough. Okay. Well, first, I will be answering some questions that I get quite often, because, like I said, I will once again send my phone number. And some questions I get a lot, so I already discussed them real quick. So obviously the difference between this and like the full course, I think a lot of you names already recognize. I think that you're already in the full course. But the main difference, obviously, is that we are going to discussing all material at the full course, which we couldn't do today. Makes sense? Small groups. We also got a relatively small group now. And you also have room for your questions now. And in 24/7 WhatsApp aid, you can also do that now. If it's to me, you don't have to purchase like a course. You can just text me, and I will help you guys out. No worries. Well, the absolutes. This is an important advice. Absolutes are an absolute no-go. And what I mean with this goes for your entire bachelor. Whenever you get presented an exam question that you don't know the answer to, for example, they ask you, okay, women are better at sports than men. True or false? Let's say you get that question and you haven't studied it. That is an absolute. There is no nuance in that question whatsoever. And that should give you alarm bells and tell you this is wrong. Because obviously it depends on what sport, it depends on what woman, it depends on the culture. Psychology is way more nuanced than that. So that's just a general advice I would give you. Whenever you come across a question and you don't know the answer, you have to guess. Go for the most nuanced gray answer you can find. Don't go for the absolutes. Okay? Other advice, I get quite often the question like, okay, how do people generally study? Well, it really depends. That's the boring answer, obviously. But what I've noticed for years is that most people that I've been teaching, if you use the 3 out of 4 method, you will be fine for actually almost every single subject on average. So what do I mean with this? There are 4 ways, the four ways in which people study the most. Well, A is obviously following the lectures. The second one is reading or making your own summary, but at least making sure it's good quality, obviously. The third one is reading the book. Makes sense? The prescribed book. And the fourth one is following training. Those are the 4 methods that most people use. In my experience, almost everyone is fine if you do at least 3 out of 4. Some people can do 2 out of 4, some people do all 4, but just for every single subject, think for yourself, what do I find a nice way of studying? So cultural psychology, for example, you will still get that. I loved that subject. I studied the book, I studied the lectures, and I made my own summary. I didn't need any external help. I had a fine grade, didn't follow a training, had a fine grade. For other subjects, for statistics, for example, I'm not that good with mathematics. So then I decided, okay, I'm going to skip the book, go more for practice, go more for the training, and then also I got a fine grade. 4 out of 4 is generally overkill. You can do it if you want to go cum laude, but it's generally overkill. 2 out of 4 is for some people too little. So I would say to be safe, first period to 3 out of 4, check out your grades and then determine per subject what you find a nice way of studying. Okay, all right. Yes, then we will go to the last question. Think for yourself, give 2 reasons why punishment is not effective. I will give you a second to do this. I gave you the 5 reasons. Can you think out of the top of your mind the 5 reasons? And I will show you a little bit. I will show you in a little bit what are the right ones. Just say yes in the chat when you're done. Okay. Okay, see some yeses. Okay. All right, I'll walk you through it. And like I said, obviously the exam is multiple choice, but as we also learn, ironically, in the chapter of memory at experimental psychology, it's not just about rehearsing information, it's about retrieving it. So also if you're studying a summary, don't just read it, put like something on top of it, try to get out of your memory, what did they say again, check if it's correct. If not, read it again and do the same thing over and over again. Retrieving is crucial for learning. So let's go for punishment. The 5 reasons, you can check how many you had correct. The intensity has to increase, right? The headbutt example has to go harder and harder. Time interval, you have to be very quick with your punishment, otherwise it's not effective. The kind of punishment has to be consistent, like taking away the phone of your kid. You can do it more than once. Association with reward. Kids, they don't like being abused, but it's also the time that they get with the parents. And lastly, avoiding the punishment instead of actually changing your behavior with the secret language thingy. Okay. Well, what is important, by the way, is if you, so I'm going to be teaching also the full groups. So if you want to participate in the full groups, and if you absolutely despise me, then that's maybe not the wisest idea. I will be sticking around, by the way, if you have any questions whatsoever. If you want to be with the full course, if you want to attend, because I think there's still space, I assume so. I think so. This is a discount code. I will throw it in the chat. So it's Paddy25. And in the meantime, what I will do is I will show you where you can do this. Let me see. Give me a sec. And I will be, like I said, we still have 9 minutes left. So if you have any questions whatsoever, also about different subjects, how to study, I'm here. And I will, in the meantime, kind of show you what the options are, because there are a few different ones. And I just want to make sure that if you purchase something, that you actually know what you're purchasing. Because some things are cheaper than others, so there's not always a good reason to take the most expensive thing. Just think what works best for you. Okay. There we are. So it's correct. You can now see my screen. So basically, there are two kind of courses for experimental if you want that. This is, by the way, without the discount. So obviously you can still apply the discount. So the cheapest one is this. So it's then with the discount, $64, I think, a little bit less. So this is just what we did today, but then for the entire course. So that's 7 hours instead of the hour and a half that we had today. So that's everything covered, basically. The pass rate for that was 89%. So that's pretty good, if I say so myself. This one is a little bit more expensive. So it's like $20, but with discount, it's going to be less of a difference. The difference between this one and this one, as you can see, is the practice course. So here, all the way in the end, so these two moments, they are the same for both the cheap one as the expensive one. So the Friday 11th October, Monday 14th. The difference is in Tuesday 15th October. So this is 3.5 hours of just practicing with exam questions, if that is something that you would like. So it's like $20 more, and you get like 3.5 hours of like only exam questions all the way at the end. That's basically the difference. I will be teaching all of it. If there's a moment that you can't attend, you can always get a recording. So that's not a problem at all. Okay. Goal is just to make sure that you pass your exam. So yeah, it can't be that if you have to work on Friday that you're suddenly fucked. We're not going to do it like that. That's basically how it works. I will see if I can. Oh. And then I will go back to the chat, see if I have any questions. All right, and then for the last 5-6 minutes, I will be sticking around. I will be stopping with this. Let me open something that's convenient for you. I will open the last thingy. No, not this one. This one. Yes, I think this one's good. Yeah. Oh no, this doesn't make sense. I mean this one. Okay. In case you need a little bit more time, I saw that some people didn't answer that yet. Yeah, like I said, whatsoever, also if it's not about like extra courses or just something that you find difficult, because I know that sometimes university can be difficult to find, and then you go through a whole process and then you come at the student desk, and then the student desk says you have to go to someone else, and the student desk is also like open only like 6 hours a week or something like that. So I know generally the challenge. So if you want to attend the honors program or excellence program, or if you want to go abroad, or like an internship or that kind of stuff, or questions about masters, yeah, just let me know. Okay. I'm gonna send my phone number once again. It's becoming a little bit desperate now, you know. If a guy sends you his phone number 3 times in an hour and a half, then maybe I should just take the hint. But yeah. Okay. And by the way, but it's more like a personal note, I really like it that every single year the study of psychology is growing. So that's, I think, a very good sign, because it's a very complex matter, and a lot of people they study it, I think, because they want to help people. So it's easy to become cynical about the world, but to see that this study grows every year, while fiscal law, for example, doesn't, I think it's a good sign. I think we're doing, at least you making a right choice, well, in humanity wise. So I appreciate that. You're welcome. And cool to see that there are more Dutchies joining the international track. When I did that, there was almost no one. But I think that also shows a lot of, you know, courage. Just go out of your comfort zone, where you can also just stay in there. I think that's a very good sign. It's also the reason why the whole Erasmus has been created, right? So that people from all different regions of Europe get to connect with one another. And I think that's a cool thing. You're very welcome. Much appreciated. Thank you for your attendance. Now I'll be sticking around a little bit longer. Yeah, and it's also just a cool subject, right? I mean, when I started studying psychology, I must say I wasn't really sure if what I wanted to do in my life, but just knowing about people was like, okay, that's a good way to start. You know, I'll figure it out along the way. But you're very welcome. You're very welcome. Okay. Well, if there's no more questions, then I will leave you alone. And like I said, you have my number. So if anything pops up whatsoever, feel free to yeah, to send me a text. Are we going to get the summary in the Google Drive? Yes. Yeah. Yeah. I think I might also just be shared in the group chat, but definitely in the Google Drive. Can you briefly explain the interactive activation model in language? Do you mean it in the context of dualism, like when someone is bilingual? Yeah, exactly. So in the context of when someone is bilingual, basically what that means is that so they first thought that you have that basically you have like two language systems in your head. That's what they first thought. So you have English and Dutch, for example, and either you activate English or you activate Dutch. And the interactive activation model basically says that that's not the case, that they are kind of intertwined. So that instead what you have is like one mental lexicon. So that's like the library of all the words and all the things you know in your head. And that both language systems kind of stream out of that. Another important thing to remember from the language activation model, of the interactive activation model in language, is that that's the word that the letters in a word interact with one another. And what they mean with that is that they did an experiment. That was the initial experiment, and then they show you either like a fake letter or a real letter. And then as quickly as possible, you have to say, is this real or is this fake? What they found was that if you do the same experiment, but then not just showing the letter, like this is an O and this is something weird, but not just doing it like this, but actually making it part of a word. So they throw in the word horse and they throw in an O, and in another context, they throw in the word horse and they throw in this. And then same idea, you have to recognize as quickly as possible, is this a real word or not? And what they found is that if it's part of a word, then it's easier to recognize if it's a real letter or not. So what they mean with that is like, okay, establishing if a letter is a real letter depends on the context in which it is presented. If I see just a letter, it takes a little bit longer than when I see the word horse, because then I can read very fast. But if it's a fake letter, then I don't know what's standing there, what's written there. So that's essentially the takeaway messages in that. Does that make sense? Cool. Cool. All right. Okay. Well, we reached 12:15, so perfect timing. And like I said, I'm also in the group chat, so also feel free to send a question in the group chat. Then you guys can also help one another. And if any question remains, then I'm always happy to help. So just let me know. Okay. Thank you so much. Have a good day, and yeah, enjoy and good luck with studying. See you. Cheers.